Towards this hour, President Putin has insisted Russia will take all of Ukraine's Donbas region by force if necessary. It comes as he begins a two-day visit to India, where he is looking to shore up support from an ally with whom he hopes to expand trade and defense ties. And the Gates Foundation says preventable child death will rise this year for the first time this century. Its founder, Bill Gates, says he believes 200,000 more children under the age of 5 will die in 2025 compared with last year, as international aid cuts undermine decades of progress. And it's that time of the year when the music streaming site Spotify lists the year's most popular artist and tracks among its more than 700 million listeners. And that's the top of the list. First of this hour, to the flurry of diplomatic activity as the Trump administration tries to secure backing for its latest plan to end the war between Russia and Ukraine. President Putin has insisted Russia will take control of eastern Ukraine's Donbas region militarily or otherwise. In defiant comment, just days after his talks with U.S. negotiators on ending the war, Mr. Putin said Ukrainian troops will have to leave territory and they still control, or it will be conquered by force. European countries, he said, should get involved in what he called a peace settlement rather than hindering the process. The comments were carried in Russian state media as Mr. Putin traveled to India to share up support from a key ally, which is under intense U.S. pressure to stop buying Russian oil. Meanwhile, President Trump's special envoy Steve Witkoff is meeting Ukraine's top negotiator Rustin Umerov in Florida to discuss the U.S.-backed peace plan. And correspondents say that so far Moscow's rhetoric is as hardline as ever, undermining the happy sounds we've been hearing from American negotiators and Donald Trump himself.
On Ukraine, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner were there last night with Vladimir Putin. Can you give us an update about those talks? It sounds from what the Kremlin is saying that they're not going to compromise. Can you tell us what you've...
I don't know what the Kremlin is doing. I can tell you that they had a reasonably good meeting with President Putin. We're going to find out. It's a war that should have never been started. It's a war, if I were president, we had a rigged election. If I were president, that war would have never happened. It's a terrible thing. But I thought they had a very good meeting yesterday with President Putin. We'll see what happens.
When you spoke with Mr. Witkoff and with Mr. Kushner last night, did they give you the sense that President Putin still wants to end the war, wants to make peace?
He would like to end the war. That was their impression. Now, whether or not, that was their impression. Their impression was that he would like to see the war ended. I think he'd like to get back to dealing a more normal life. I think I'd like to be trading with the United States of America, frankly, instead of, losing thousands of soldiers a week. But their impression was very strongly that they'd like to make a deal. We'll see what happens.
For more on this story, I'm joined now on the line from London by the author and international affairs analyst, Dr. Marek Laskiewicz. Thank you, Dr. Marek. Good to see you.
Good evening.
Yeah, good evening, and it's good to see you. Well, President Putin has openly stated that Russia will take control of the Donbas militarily if necessary. But how does this hardline stance fit into the ongoing peace effort being pushed by the US? And secondly, from a diplomatic standpoint, what message is the Kremlin sending when it insists the Ukrainian forces must withdraw or face force?
Well, that is exactly as you stated. There's a contradiction here. What Putin wants is peace on his own terms, period. But then again, that's what Zelensky wants peace on his terms. The terms are incompatible, and therefore it is very hard to see how President Trump can succeed in brokering or bringing about by any means a peace treaty between the two. And precisely as you've pointed out, what Russia is doing is advancing all the time, and that means it is not prepared, as it sees it, to compromise its demands, and therefore it's very hard to see what President Trump's next move can possibly be.
Well, we've had very optimistic statement from U.S. negotiators and even from Donald Trump himself. How credible is that optimism in the face of Moscow's uncompromising rhetoric?
Yeah, it does appear to be not linked to reality, this good mood. However, it is entirely possible that America is offering President Putin, by his good trade and so on, that there is a possibility that President Putin will compromise to some degree. And that's why I think that President Trump is in a good mood, because he thinks he can still work some sort of trade economic magic, which will bring about a peace treaty with terms that are not as extreme as President Putin wants them right now. However, the problem is that President Zelensky does not want to give up any territory at all. And so even were President Donald Trump to make an agreement with President Putin, it's very hard to see how that would be at all acceptable to President Zelensky.
But again, if you look at the current stance by Moscow, one wonder what exactly is the U.S.-backed peace plan proposing at this time, and how realistic is it under the current military condition or political conditions, as it were?
Well, it would appear to be that the Americans want Ukraine to cede territory de jure. That is to say that Russia will be left the legal owner of a substantial amount of Ukrainian territory. And this is a sticking point because Russia wants more territory, I think, than what America is prepared to offer. In other words, wants the entire Donbass region, part of which, incidentally, is still not occupied by Russian troops. However, there is another aspect to this, is the Ukrainian security guarantees. It's not clear whether Russia will accept anything there that has been proposed, because actually what it really would like to do is take over Ukraine. And clearly, by stripping down Ukrainian legal forces, it'll be in a position to restart the war in the future. So, as things stand, Russia's in a sort of winning position in some respects, and therefore President Putin's unlikely to compromise. But there is some hope, because of the sheer economic strength of USA, that some sort of agreement between him and President Trump might be reached, but not easily with President Zelensky.
Well, as we know, Putin is currently in India, well, a key ally that's facing intense pressure from Washington over Russian oil purchases. But again, how significant is India's role in shaping the trajectory of this war?
Well, India is one of the sources of trade for Russia, and so a source of money, and therefore it is important. Moreover, the very fact that President Putin has allies like India or China is very important, because part of the West's narrative, and in particular Ukraine's and Europe's, is that Putin is an isolated, beleaguered figure. If he goes to meet the president of India, he's neither isolated nor beleaguered. So there's an economic aspect of the support of India for Russia. There's also this PR, diplomatic aspect. And finally, there are degrees of arms sales between them. And incidentally, there's one other very important part India plays. It's to do with the displacing of the dollar as the international currency. China, India, Russia want, in effect, to remove the dollar from their transactions, which is actually a significant blow to the USA and how it is the most important shaper of the world's future.
Again, I mean, one wonder to what extent is US seeing India as an obstacle? How do you think US is seeing India now in these, maybe peace efforts?
Yeah, the problem goes back actually decades. India is nominally non-aligned, and yet it has also seen itself really as an ally of Russia because of China. There's also the business of how Pakistan works with the Americans. There's a saying in Pakistan, there are the three A's that control Pakistan: Allah, the army, and the Americans. And so on the whole, India is not exactly an ally of USA. It's not an enemy, but it's not a close ally. It's nothing like, say, Israel or the United Kingdom. And so America is seen not as an entirely benign force. It certainly is not entirely on India's side in this and in other respects. So although they are not enemies, they're certainly not close friends.
Well, Ukraine's negotiator, Rustem Umerov, is meeting with the U.S. Envoy, Steve Witkoff, on the other side. But again, the question is, what is Kyiv looking for from Washington at this stage?
Kyiv would like Washington to make a volte-face and completely break away from Russia. That is what his goal would be. Kyiv's goal is the liberation of all its territories which have been annexed or taken militarily by Russia since 2014. So therefore, its goals are quite clear. The problem is, can it achieve these goals? And does America share them? And the answer is, as far as one can see, is no to both. However, it's not giving in, it's fighting on, it's refusing to accept the secession of any territory, and even asserting it's against its constitution. So what Kiev would like to see was America coming more to its side. It did secure a diplomatic success recently, which is very important to note. President Donald Trump was saying by Thursday, it was supposed to be curtains for Ukraine, that either they fight on by themselves or they agree to the peace terms, which he and President Putin had worked out. And Kiev succeeded in changing these, to the extent, of course, that President Putin no longer wanted them and has essentially renegotiated them recently with America. But the point is that Kiev is not entirely bereft of victories in its way, either on the battlefield or diplomatically. This having been the most recent, very spectacular one, because Putin, it would appear, had converted President Donald Trump. President Donald Trump had given an ultimatum, and suddenly there's no ultimatum. So therefore, these talks will result in Kiev's point of view getting to America, and there will be no immediate quick fix as a result.
I mean, in the past, Dr. Marek, we've seen between Russia, I beg your pardon, Ukraine, President Zelensky, and of course, US President Donald Trump having a fiscal argument about this peace deal. And given Russia's current escalating tone, does Ukraine view the US peace proposal as a genuine pathway to ending the conflict, or just another diplomatic maneuver?
Oh, I think they see it that it's possible once the peace treaty, as set out by Donald Trump, has been sufficiently altered by them to make it, in effect, what Ukraine wanted all along. So, no, they're not turning their backs on the peace treaty, nor is Russia either. The problem is that goals are utterly incompatible. However, President Zelensky and indeed President Putin are both talking to the Americans, and the peace treaty plan is still going ahead, but for obvious reasons, it's going ahead very slowly. In a way, of course, this is only to be expected. Even if they weren't so divergent in their viewpoints, you could have a quarrel over tiny little things as well. So, no, the Ukrainians are still positive about the American peace plan and hope in these negotiations taking place right now to alter them more to in their favor.
Almost out of time, Dr. Marek, but let's look at a few issues here. We're seeing, public statement that, worlds apart. I mean, in terms of reconciliation note from the U.S. and, of course, confrontational language from Russia. What's likely happening behind closed doors? I mean, that we are not seeing. And do you think Moscow is simply using headline rhetoric to leverage in this particular negotiation?
I don't think it's purely for leverage. You're making the claim that Moscow is setting out a hardline stall and afterwards is prepared to compromise. That's not how Putin sees it. It's sort of kind of the other way around. It's not. The other way around would be a better way of putting it. Simply that Moscow might well abandon some points if the economic goodies offered by America are sufficient. However, They are pressing ahead, Russia, for the complete occupation of Donbass, and that is currently the situation. What's going on behind the scenes, as far as one can see, is exactly what America is offering Russia in terms of economics, in terms of the relief of sanctions, in terms of trade. That is what we're not seeing. The other thing we're not seeing are the specifics of this peace treaty. I mean, we're guessing that there's territorial concessions, that there's a problem with security, but we are guessing. And that's the other aspect we don't know much about. However, there is a third point which must be stressed at this moment. Russia is now threatening Europe. The language is increasingly bellicose. Of course, please note, it will fit in with my previous theories I've noted in my books that Russia will soon later have a war with Europe. And it's these unnecessary threats which Russia is making, which are so strange, as if it were looking for a war in Europe, because they're quite irrelevant. Europe's quite irrelevant as a first analysis in settling the Ukraine dispute. And that must be also brought out here.
Let's wrap up with this, Dr. Marek. I mean, what next? One would say, what are the possible next diplomatic steps if the Florida talks between Umerov and Witkoff fail to produce concrete progress?
I think we'll find that there will be some progress in the sense that Ukraine will once again alter back some of the points which President Putin just recently put back on the table. And this will carry on for some time. There will be no immediate peace treaty, but the push for it is not slackened and will carry on for some time. That, therefore, will go on. Russia's military pressure will carry on for some time, and it seems to be very successful at present. And the other interesting one, I underline, state again, is what Russia and Europe. There is a new bellicosity there, a new tension. That is one to watch out for.
Well, I must thank you, Dr. Marek. He's an author and international affairs analyst. Thank you so much for your time on The World.